evening. I wanted to welcome all of you. Tonight we're here to see Philip C. Stead, the Caldecott Award-winning author of A Sick Day for Amos McGee that was illustrated by his wife, Erin Stead. Um, and I wanted to welcome him, and I want to also welcome Matthew Cordell, another Caldecott Medal-winning author and illustrator of Wolf in the Snow and Hello Neighbor, The Kind and Caring World of Mr. Rogers. They're here to talk about their new book, Follow That Frog. It is part of their third book in their kind of collaborative venture that they've done together. And they're going to give a reading of it and a kind of cool little presentation. And I think we're going to get some fun art from Matt, and then we'll do questions and answers at the end. So hello, guys. How are y'all?
Good. It's great
Doing
to be
well,
here.
thank you.
Or here, as the case may be. Yeah.
Yes, in the new world.
Cyberspace.
I always get really excited to go on book tour through the South in the wintertime because it's always so miserable here in Michigan. So this is kind of unfortunate because it is negative 33 degrees not far from here.
You could come here and tell us all how it's not cold, because we're experiencing a cold rain that is like this. It's in the 20s, and that's untenable for us.
Yeah,
so you could be like, oh, this is sweater weather.
Negative 33 is a full 53 degrees colder. So think about that.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here.
All right, I'll get off the screen and come back later.
Would love to talk to you guys about our new book here. So Matt and I, we got to know each other about 10 years ago. We'd always wanted to work together, basically from the time we met. In children's books, you get to know a lot of people. You meet a lot of people on the road. You meet people at conferences and at bookstores and festivals. And I would say that while we tend to get along with almost everyone we meet because we have so much in common, it's very rare that you bump into somebody that you really kind of see eye to eye with creatively, somebody that you just know right away that you could work with, you're going to have a lot of fun working with. Luckily, I happen to be married to one of those people. I make books with my wife, Erin, as well. But besides Erin, Matt is the only other person that I've sort of ventured outside of my own studio to work on a project with. And these are the 3 books we've worked on together. They're all part of a series, part of a trilogy. They can be enjoyed individually. They don't necessarily have to be read in order. You don't have to buy all 3 to understand the story. But all 3 of them sort of feature the same characters and sort of build on sort of unusual world that we began back with the first book, Special Delivery. So this is me. This is a little drawing that Matt made of me. This can be found actually, if you take the jacket, a little piece of paper that covers the book, if you take that off, this is what's called a case illustration. And most illustrators tend to ignore this as real estate that they could be putting artwork on. And that's because by the time you get to the end of a project, you're so sort of fall over tired at all the work you've done to create that book that you don't really want to even think about what you could be illustrating here. But Matt is the kind of illustrator that's always sort of giving himself bigger problems to solve. So Matt decided that he was going to create one of what I think is the most insane case illustrations I've ever seen. So I'm going to hold that up real close. I might have there. That's a better view of it. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little individual postage stamps. Each one is completely unique, I'm pretty sure. I don't think there's any one that repeats in all this. And there's little nuggets in here for picture book lovers and also for Matt and I. There's portraits of myself, and I think of Erin, and portraits of the different characters in the book. I see references to other children's books, other classic children's books like The Little House and Where the Wild Things Are. This is another piece of artwork that Matt made several years ago, another portrait of me. I think this is his finest work ever. I think Matt is a very underrated sculptor. I think people think of him as a 2-dimensional artist, but I think his 3-dimensional chops are right up there with it. This is my daughter. She is 3 years old. Her name's Adelaide. She's seen here riding on the back of a giant frog, which is, I think, very appropriate for the story we're going to read today. As I was putting this presentation together, I realized that Matt and I have been working on this book, Follow That Frog, for longer than Adelaide has been around. We've been working on this book for more than 3 years. And I like to point that out, especially to any younger people in the audience that are listening and watching, because I think sometimes these books, when you pick them up, they look like the kind of thing that could have been dashed off really quickly. I mean, the artwork seems very loose and easy when Matt does his thing, and it's not that many pages. I think this book is 40 pages, and you can read through it in about 10 minutes. But even though the experience is only 10 minutes long as a finished product, it's the culmination of weeks and months and sometimes years of back and forth between the artist, the illustrator, the editor, and all the other people that get involved in the making of a book. Here is Adelaide again, and she's seen here with her mom, Erin, my wife. Erin is also an illustrator. These are just a few of the books that she has illustrated for me. So stories that I wrote that Erin did the artwork for. And people ask me all the time why I would want to work with other illustrators when I could just illustrate the books myself. I began my career actually as an artist, not as an author. I went to art school in college. I thought of myself as an artist all through my childhood. I was always drawing, painting, working with my hands. It wasn't until much later that I actually started writing stories. And what I realized very quickly when I did start writing stories is that certain stories really played to my strengths as an illustrator, and other stories did not. There are stories that I've written that, as much as I maybe would have liked to illustrate them, there was going to be somebody else that could do it better. So in the case of these books that I've done with Erin, I think that Erin is especially good at illustrating relationships between animals and people. I think that's the thing she probably does better than just about anybody else. So anytime I've written a story that's really about a relationship between an animal and a person, or sometimes even relationships between an animal and another animal, I often give that story to Erin, because I think that she just has this peculiar knack for really finding the emotion in those relationships. These are a few of the books that I've done for myself. So books that I wrote, but also did the artwork for. A lot of illustrators, most illustrators, I would say, tend to pick one style and work sort of within that style throughout most of their career. They just get really, really good at one thing or maybe two things. And that is something that I'm actually very jealous of. I have not taken that approach. In almost all of my books, what I've done is used a completely new art style. So sometimes I've used collage or oil painting. I've worked in chalk pastels, crayons, gouache paint. I've even used photography in one book, printmaking, just about anything. And I do that because I love trying new things and working with new materials. Like all the same reasons I love making things when I was a kid are the same reasons I love making them now. I love exploring what I can do with different art materials. But the downside is that I never really feel like I become an expert at anything. So right when I feel like, okay, I've almost mastered this technique, that's usually like at the end of a book. I've got 1 or 2 illustrations left, and then the book is done and I move on to the next one. So although I've worked in so many different styles, the one thing that sort of brings them all together is that all of my books are made by hand. I don't do any of my work in the computer. I like to use traditional materials, things that you can find in an art supply store, things I used to use when I was a kid. One of my favorite books I've ever made is this book called Jonathan and the Big Blue Boat, which I think is actually sitting on the shelf behind me. This book was done in this sort of elaborate collage style. So lots and lots of different pieces of found paper or papers that I've made and drawn on or painted over, all cut up and torn up and pasted together to make a single image. Another book I made shortly after Jonathan is this one here called A Home for Bird. This book is it looks to me, even though I know better, it looks to me like a book that was done very quickly and very simply, and couldn't have taken very long. But this book took me almost 7 years to make. I think it looks like something that could be dashed off really quickly because the main material that I used was actually just crayons. So not very much different than the same kind of crayons you would have used in elementary school, or you are using in elementary school if you're watching today and you happen to be in elementary school. One thing that any kid could tell you though about working in crayons is that you can't erase them. So anytime you make a mistake, there's no going back. Every mark you put on the page is a permanent mark. And so even though the end product often looks very free and loose and fun, one image that makes it into the book might have a history of having been thrown in the garbage 10 times before that. Matt, I think, can probably relate to this because Matt uses a similarly unforgiving materials. He uses pen and ink and watercolor. And again, those materials often feel really loose and free and fun, but in the same way, you can't erase those materials. So anytime you make a mark, if you don't like it, you either have to find some kind of way to work around it, which I think Matt is really good at actually, or you have to throw it out and start fresh. I often use these sort of gouache paints to pair with those crayons. I like putting materials together that don't normally go together, just to see what happens. Sometimes the results are good, sometimes the results are bad, but either way, the results tend to be surprising, and I like to surprise myself while I'm working. People often ask me what was my favorite book when I was a kid, and the answer is definitely this one here, The BFG by Roald Dahl. I loved all of Roald Dahl's books, and I loved Roald Dahl's writing, but I think the real reason I loved these Roald Dahl books was that the world was so beautifully illustrated by this man named Quentin Blake. So Quentin Blake was my favorite illustrator as a kid. He's still one of my favorite illustrators today. He's still alive. He lives in Great Britain. I think he might be in his 90s now, but he still works and works pretty prolifically. I just loved Quentin Blake's style, everything about it. It was this really seemingly simple pen and ink and watercolor style that made every drawing sort of seem so easy. But I used to sit, even when I was just 7, 8, 9 years old, I used to sit in at my little art desk in my room, and I would try to recreate these drawings. And I learned very quickly that Quentin Blake's art is not easy to mimic. That sort of looseness and that freedom that he has with his line and with his color is really, really hard to replicate. So even as a professional artist, after years of art school and over 10 years of making books for children, I still have not found a way to draw and paint like Quentin Blake. And that happens to be one of the main reasons why I wanted to work with Matthew, because I think Matthew is one of the only people in the business that really has what Quentin Blake has in his artwork. Especially now that more and more artists are doing their art on the computer. Fewer and fewer people really have that ability to use the kinds of materials he's using and just to use their hands to make something on paper that looks like this. So I'm gonna hand it over to Matt now, and he's gonna talk to you a little bit about how he works and a little bit about himself, and then we're gonna talk together a little bit about the 3 books we've made.
Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for being here tonight, or thanks for watching. If you're watching this after that, it's not live, but this is also from that special delivery case cover where I drew like a bunch of stamps, and ended up drawing, members of my family, and our editor even made the cut. And like Phil said, there's a bunch of, if you get a chance to look at it, you'll see a bunch of other, children's book inspirations that I grew up loving and still love. And so there's a bunch of different little surprises on there. But I also did a self-portrait, And this is a little stamp self-portrait of me. My friends call me Matt, so that is that's how I looked after drawing all those stamps, I guess. Looking pretty tired. This is me from a long time ago. This was me in the second grade. This is my second grade class picture. And I grew up in the South, in Square Books is in Mississippi, in South Carolina. And the thing about me growing up is I've always loved to draw. As soon as I could, as soon as I was able to, pick up a pen or pencil and make something on paper, I've always loved to draw. So I've been drawing my whole life, and it's really cool that I get to have a job where I get to continue to draw and make pictures and make books and talk to families and boys and girls about the drawings I make. And so so that was me growing up. Now I live in, when I was 24 years old, I moved to a big city called Chicago. I wanted to live in a bigger city. I had some friends that lived in Chicago. So, and I wanted to be in a place that offered different creative opportunities. So I moved to Chicago, and I was working as an artist there, and then ended up getting married, and my wife and I moved to a suburb of Chicago. It's called Gurnee, Illinois. So that it's on this map of the United States. If you're looking, you see a little tiny red star there. That is where I live with my wife and our kids, in this town called Gurnee. And we have our own Six Flags here in Gurnee. So this is a picture of my family. That is me on the left. That's my wife Julie on the right. And Julie makes books for boys and girls too. Her books are for older boys and girls. She writes young adult fiction, so like high school aged kids. So when, I don't know if you're younger watching this right now, when you get older, hopefully you can find some of Julie's books. We have two kids. That is our daughter Romy, who has blue hair in this picture. She's dyed her hair a couple different colors during the pandemic lockdown. It's been one of the activities she's done, and right now her hair is kind of a more orange color. So Romy's 12, and that is our son Dean, who is 7 years old. And that's a picture of my family. I have one more picture of my family I want to show you, and this is a drawing I did of my family. So if you are familiar with social media, depending on what age you are, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and I like to draw myself as a mouse a lot of times. Draw myself as a mouse doing different things, and I've gotten to where I draw my family as mice too. And this was a portrait I drew of our family for our holiday card this year. Nice wintry setting here. And one more member of our family is our cat, Norbert. And that is Norbert, looking much thinner in this picture than he is now. He's kind of put on some weight in his older age. So this is where I work, and this is actually one of the rooms in our house. So I work from home, and this is actually where I'm sitting right now. So this is the desk where I make my drawings. This is also where I write. I write books as well, and I have a laptop that I'm looking at right now. And this is do pretty much everything in this little corner of this room here. And so the way that I make my pictures, I'm like Phil. I like to use art supplies. I like to kind of be old school and use traditional, make art traditionally with paper and pens and pencils. And so I actually use sort of an old fashioned type of pen that you have to dip into ink to draw with. That's the ink that I use there. It is a black waterproof ink. And these are the pens that I dip into the ink. So if you were to use a pen or a marker like this one, this is a Sharpie, the ink is all contained inside the pen. So you don't have to dip or do anything with it. But the pens you see here do not have ink inside them. You have to dip them using the point. You dip the point into that bottle of ink, and then you can draw with it, and it runs out, and then you dip it again. And there's different types of pens, dip pens you can use. There's two here that have like a metal tip or nib, they're called, and there's different sharpnesses, and they make different thicknesses. And sometimes you can even draw with like a stick. This is the one on the left is a bamboo pen, which is, if you know what bamboo is, it's basically like a stick, and you can sharpen it to a point and dip it. And all different nibs and different pens that you dip in ink will give you different line thicknesses and textures. So I use a variety of different dip pens. And then, so after I'm done drawing everything, it's only black and white drawings. I still need to color my pictures. So to color my pictures, I use a watercolor paint. So once the ink is dry, like I said, it's waterproof. So I can paint right on top of those line drawings with wet watercolor paints. So most of the watercolor paints I use or some of them I use are dry like this. Like I think these are the ones you might use in school because they're easier to work with. But I also use tube watercolor paints that you can squirt out and make your own palettes and everything. So these are some of the books I've made throughout my career. The top books here on the top row are books that another author wrote, and I got to illustrate their story. But I also write and illustrate my own books. So the bottom two rows of books are all books that I both wrote and illustrated myself. So I do a little bit of both when it comes to picture books. I've illustrated a lot of books by other authors, but I've also more and more I'm writing and illustrating my own. The only thing I haven't done is write something and another person illustrates it, which I think would be fun to kind of flip the coin and do it like that sometime, but I haven't done that yet. So talking about authors and illustrators. So if you're looking at a book, reading a book like Follow That Frog, that has been written by one person and illustrated by another person, and you wonder, how did these two people make this book? Maybe you're thinking about how they made this book. Maybe you're thinking, which I think a lot of people think, is that these two people work together. They collaborate, they exchange ideas, they talk about things that they want to do, and then make the book together, completely working together. But the truth is, when an author and an illustrator work on one book, they are kept separate. That author and that illustrator, pretty much in most cases in children's books, do not work together. They don't sit down and talk and talk about their ideas and exchange different thoughts and make changes together. The author and the illustrator are kept separate by a person at the publisher of the book, the company that prints the books and sends them out to stores and libraries. And usually there's one or two people that the author and illustrator are talking to at the publisher. And in our case, when we made these three books, we were working with our editor, Neil Porter. Now, the difference here, though, is Phil and I were friends before we even made the books that we made together. And we're also friends with Neil. So the three of us wanted to work together. We wanted to kind of buck the system and get on the phone and talk to each other and laugh about our different ideas and have fun and make a book really together and collaborate on it together, which is not particularly the norm, but we wanted to make it happen that way. So on all three of our books, we got to work together. We got to actually collaborate, and it was a lot of fun. So now we're going to talk about a little bit about the first two books, Special Delivery, The Only Fish in the Sea, and then Phil is going to read the entire book of Follow That Frog. So let's find out what happens in the first book of Special Delivery with Phil.
All right, so this is the first book that Matt and I worked on together. And when we first started working, we did not intend to make 3 books all in the same series. I actually had never worked in any kind of series before. I don't know if Matt had. I don't think so. Every book that I had ever made was always just a standalone book that was its own universe, and then I'd move on to the next thing. But we ended up having so much fun making this one that we were able to sort of con our publisher into letting us do a second one. And when we couldn't con that publisher into doing a third one, we conned a whole new publisher to let us do a third one. But this one of my favorite illustrations in the book is actually just the cover. The cover illustration, this was Matt's idea, is based on a very famous stamp. So here is that stamp. This is called the Inverted Jenny. Anybody that is watching that collects stamps or knows a little bit about stamps, I collected stamps when I was a kid. will know a little bit about the inverted Jenny. It's the most rare and valuable stamp, at least in the country, maybe in the world. It was accidentally printed upside down very briefly, and when the people printing the stamp realized what they had done, they quickly stopped the presses, turned it right side up, and continued the print run the way that it should have been printed. But a few of these stamps made it out into circulation and are still every now and then popping up here and there. And when they do, they're auctioned off for like hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it was the perfect stamp or a perfect image to base our cover on, because this book is such a weird sort of upside down, crazy story, and unusual and rare in its own way, I think. One sort of unusual and rare thing about this book is the very first page. So usually when you open up not just a picture book, but any book really, you will find a title page. But Matt decided he wanted to do this book a little bit differently. We do not have a title page right away. We don't get to the title for quite a while. Instead, we start right into the story. So we begin here with this little boy who actually doesn't have a name in this book, but Matt and I decided later that his name should be Sherman. So it starts with Sherman loudly shouting, "Hey, Sadie!" And then you turn the page, and now Sherman is racing after his friend Sadie, and he yells, "Wait up!" And you can see that Sadie just passed the mailbox, and if you look very closely, you can see that she's hanging on to the end of a string. But we don't know yet what that string is attached to until we turn the page. Now we finally get the title page, and we see that Sadie is in fact walking an elephant down the sidewalk. So now we turn the page again, and the story really begins. Sherman says, "Where are you going?" And Sadie says, "Where do you think? You don't just drop an elephant in the mailbox. You've got to go to the post office." So here we are in a post office as dreamed up by Matthew Cordell. For some reason, Matt decided to put this post office entirely outside, which is another one of my favorite sort of weird details about this book. This was not something I thought of or anything that I had told him he ought to do. This was his own sort of fever dream of what this book should be like. So we've got this great sort of older hippie guy working behind the counter here, and his name's Jim. He says, "Hey, Sadie." And Sadie says, "Hey, Jim, I'd like to mail this elephant, please, to my great Aunt Josephine, who lives almost completely alone and could really use the company." So what we're about to learn is that Sadie is not going to be able to afford all of the stamps that she's going to need in order to mail this elephant. She's just going to need way, way, way too many. So instead, she has to find some other way to get this elephant all the way across town to her great Aunt Josephine. So there are a variety of different sort of unexpected and ill-advised modes of transportation, including this biplane that she commandeers, which very soon after runs out of gas and crash lands. A little bit later, we find Sadie here riding down a river on the back of an alligator with the elephant sort of swimming happily behind. Up there in the corner, you can see the caboose of a train as it chugs along. They end up boarding that train, hopping on the train, and then shortly thereafter are robbed by monkey bandits. But Sadie, one thing I just really love about this character is that she's not bothered by anything. So even when things go wrong, when they crash land the airplane or when they're robbed by these bandits, she never ever worries. Instead, she's just always, she's even keeled. She always has a plan. She never gets rattled. So in this case, she decides that she'll just join the bandits and have a great time. And they do, and the bandits end up sort of joining this mission. And in the end, they all do arrive safely at Aunt Josephine's home, where we find out that in fact, she does not live completely alone, but in fact lives in the company of all these other creatures that Sadie has mailed to her throughout the years. So that is special delivery. Matt and I talked a lot about how we wanted to make a book and eventually books that featured a really strong female character. I think at the time that we first started making Special Delivery, which is around 2013 or 2014, it was surprisingly rare to find a book that had a really strong, confident female character. And that was something we felt like, you know, we had a responsibility to do. And we talked a lot about how that character would behave, what she would even look like. Matt had the idea of making her look a little bit like a 9-year-old Amelia Earhart, which I thought was really great. So after we finished that book, we loved her character so much and we loved the world so much, we wanted to do another one. So we dreamed up this even weirder story called The Only Fish in the Sea. And I'm going to give it to Matt here to give you a quick sort of rundown of what happens in this book.
Okay, so in The Only Fish in the Sea, we use a lot of the same characters. Sadie is the main character again. You can see her here on the cover, and she's sort of confidently navigating these rough waters. And like Special Delivery was based on a famous image of the inverted Jenny, we decided to try to come up with a famous image that really spoke to the story of this book. And the idea came to mind, they're going to be on the water, they're going to be sort of, it's not really a battle so much, but it's really, you know, a big challenge that they have to overcome. So we based the cover of this one on, there's a famous painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware with some troops. And that was a really difficult time in US history. And you can see George Washington is standing very confidently while everyone else does all the work. But you know, that image, it really seemed to work well. You know, we flipped it so that the boat is traveling left to right, because when you make a book, a children's book, a picture book, you want the action to go in that direction because that's the way your eyes read. So it's based on this famous picture, but with our characters, and our picture is a lot more fun, I think. So the very first page of The Only Fish in the Sea, it starts similarly to how Special Delivery started. We see Sherman is the first character we see, and it also starts before the title page, and we see Sherman, you know, he's obviously he's in a hurry to get somewhere on his bicycle. He's running out of breath, huff 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 huff, it says. And then he stops at a stop sign and he says, "Hey Sadie, did you hear about little Amy Scott? About how she got a goldfish for her birthday and then said out loud, 'Goldfish are boring.'" And Amy Scott, and how she walked all the way out of town, past the empty school bus and down to the dock where Jacob Finney's been asleep for as long as I can remember. And little Amy Scott drops the goldfish in the baggie into the sea, which is not a very nice thing to do if you think about it, because this fish is not going to be able to get out of the bag. It's probably going to die, you know, from not being able to eat and get out into the water and swim. So Sherman says, "Imagine that poor fish all alone, floating away and away and away. He must feel like," and we have the title page, "The Only Fish in the Sea." And we see the monkeys that were in Special Delivery playing some loud music in the town square here. So what happens after that is the monkeys who were bandits in the first book become monkey sailors, and they jump in a boat with Sherman and Sadie, and they go on this rescue mission to try to save the goldfish, whose name is Ellsworth in this book. So when they do this, it's not a very chill day at sea. They have to brave, you know, rough waters. The storm starts. They almost get capsized by a big whale, and they're surrounded by sharks at some point, and they still haven't found Ellsworth. And finally, at the height of the storm, when the waters are just roaring and the boat is bouncing on the waves, they see Ellsworth, you know, just coming out of the water, but his little baggie is just flying around off of the waves, and they finally are able to save Ellsworth, and then they bring Ellsworth back home, and they decide to put Ellsworth in a place where everyone can be his friend, everyone can see him grow up, and they put him in the fountain that is in the middle of the town square, so everyone can go and visit Ellsworth. And a lot of this was a very fun picture for me to draw, because a lot of the characters get to come back from special delivery to be in this picture. And there we have Sherman and Sadie releasing their new friend Ellsworth into the fountain there. So that's how The Only Fish in the Sea ended. And then our newest book is called Follow That Frog, and Phil is going to read to you the whole book of Follow That Frog, since it's our newest and craziest adventure yet.
Yeah, so we sort of painted ourselves into a corner with these book covers. With the first two, you know, the inverted Jenny was such an obvious choice once Matt had thought of it. It seemed like, of course, that has to be the cover. And I think I recall that there was some struggle in coming up with that idea for the second cover, but eventually Matt again pulled through and came up with that George Washington cover. But with Follow That Frog, we really struggled. We thought about what sort of famous image would not just, you know, look good, but also would have something to do with this story. And I remember the one that Matt really wanted to go with at the time was actually, he wanted to make a cover based on this Star Wars poster, this famous Star Wars poster from the original movie. Because Matt is a big Star Wars buff, and he just wanted to make it happen. So this was the sketch that he had made and sent out to me and our editor Neil to see if, you know, maybe there was some hope here. Unfortunately, there really was just nothing about Star Wars that had anything to do with this book. So we tried other things. I think we tried Indiana Jones, other famous movie posters, and just nothing quite worked. So eventually we landed on, instead of a famous image, what we did is both of those first two books had really strong sort of decorative borders, and then sort of white space around the borders. One was in a gilded frame, one was the postage stamp. So throughout Follow That Frog, most of the story is told in these thought bubbles, which is a pretty unusual way to tell a story. So Matt came up with the idea of using that thought bubble as if it were a frame of its own for the story. So not quite as clever as the first two, but like I said, sometimes we never intended to make 3 books. So eventually, you know, you do what you can. But we were able to keep up with that idea in the first 2 books, from the first 2 books, of beginning the book not with a title page, but beginning right in with the action. So here we have Sadie. Oh, and I should mention that Sadie is in this book, but Sadie is not the focus of this book. We really wanted to bring back the character of Aunt Josephine, who was featured in special delivery, but did not show up at all in The Only Fish in the Sea. We're really hoping to give her her own story. So here we are inside of Aunt Josephine's home, and Sadie is standing at the door, and there's a loud knock, knock. One of my favorite details here is that bowl full of bananas. Obviously, Matt left those out for the monkeys. I should say that, like, even now, I've read the story a million times. We worked on it together for 3 years. I still see things in these illustrations I didn't catch all throughout the making.
I just saw something that I forgot was in there. It's new to me.
So we turn the page, and now we hear an even louder knock, knock. And Sadie yells, "Hey, Aunt Josephine." And now we get to the title page. We hear another knock, knock, and Sadie's drawing back the curtains to let the morning light in. Turn the page again, and Sadie yells, "Aunt Jay, wake up." And Aunt Josephine, who is still in bed with her beauty mask on and has absolutely no intention of waking up for whoever is at the door, says, "Close the curtains, Sadie, and turn out the lights. It could be a vacuum salesman, or more likely, a suitor. But I tell you this, I am quite satisfied with the state of my carpets, and my days of romance are but a memory. I've run life's race and I have earned my rest. I have been the world over, Sadie, and today I will sleep past noon. I really relate to Aunt Josephine because I would sleep past noon every day if I could. So she continues now, and the rest of the story is now going to be told in these thought bubbles as she imagines her past when she was 9 years old. She says, "Why, by the time I was 9, my trusted canine, Orion Francis Nelson, and I were blissfully bivouacked in the jungles of Peru. We were cataloging amphibians for the scientific team of Admiral Rodriguez, who had only recently been lost in a tragic banana accident. Of course, in time, my delicate beauty caught the eye of the Admiral's ridiculous son, and as he stood transfixed, he was suddenly, swiftly swallowed by a giant frog. Follow that frog, I hollered, for though I didn't care much for the Admiral's son, I do abhor a job unfinished, and it was my job to catalog that frog. Stop, I called, but the frog ignored my plea, instead fleeing south through the deserts of Patagonia and onto the back of a terrified Rhea, who did what any unfortunate flightless bird would do in such a situation. Run and run and run with no particular destination in mind. I gave chase northward aboard a reluctant tortoise, disembarking at the Panama Canal, where the frog took a sharp left turn, heading west into tempestuous waters. I had no choice but to catch the next available vessel, which was, by a stroke of poor luck, headed the completely wrong way. I chose to stay positive, though, remembering the last words of my sainted grandmother. If nothing else, Josephine, see Paris. And I would have, if not for pirates off the coast of the Canary Islands, who commandeered my humble ship, leaving me to wonder, exactly how many canaries does it take to make an island? A great many, I concluded. Are you sure I shouldn't get the door, Aunt Jay? Quite sure, Sadie, yes. And now I have a question for you. Have you ever ridden a whale? Well, I hadn't either, but guess what? It's not unlike riding a horse. All you need are a few encouraging words. Giddy up, yee-haw, follow that frog. But of course, a whale goes where a whale goes. And while we were many months at sea and a long way from Paris, I made the best of our adventure, taking in the sights, but never losing sight of the goal. Now, Sadie, after all these years and all the places I've been, I am tired. I have but one regret. For one day, Sadie, you and I will see Paris. But I may never, ever find that frog. There's one more loud knock, knock. And Sadie says, well, Aunt Jay, there's always hope. Then we turn the page and find out who in fact has been on the other side of the door all along. And there it is, it's the giant frog. Now, I think when you're an artist, particularly a children's book maker, you are constantly looking for any image that has never been done before, that you can finally be the first person to put that image to paper. And it never fails at time after time after time. You think you're the very first person to think of something, you illustrate it, and then like a year later, 2 years later, even 10 years later, you pick up some much older book and find out that it's been done before. I feel like I can confidently say that no one in the history of children's books, other than Matthew Cordell, has ever illustrated a disembodied hand coming out of the mouth of a giant frog knocking on a door. So this is, for that reason, I think maybe the single greatest image Matt has ever made and will ever make in his career. So nice. That is Follow That Frog. And before we get to questions, if you have any questions, you can start thinking of them, maybe drop them in the little Q&A section for Zoom here. And Matt is gonna entertain us for a few minutes, teaching us how to draw. Are you drawing a frog today? What's the?
I'm gonna draw a frog, yes.
So not Josephine. Let me,
yeah.
click out of the screen share here.
Okay, so I'm gonna draw a frog, a big frog like we have in the book. And while I'm doing this, if you could think of your greatest, strangest questions about our strange stories, we would love to answer your bizarre questions. So I'm gonna draw the big frog. And when I draw this frog, the first thing I like to draw is something very easy to draw, which is two circles, which will be essentially the eyes of the frog. So then I'll draw the frog's kind of eyebrows, the back of his eyes, or her, I guess it could be a female frog. And then the mouth of the frog. I'm gonna have this frog sort of, I don't know, the mouth will be open, like it's like laughing or talking. So there's the mouth of this frog. All right, and then I'm going to start to draw the rest of the frog, the frog's, the front arms of the frog. This frog's going to be sitting down, so the front arms will just be sort of relaxed with the fingers coming out here, and the other one, the other arm here, more fingers, and then the back leg will be sort of bent, like coming out like this. Big long back legs, and the other one on this side. And so then the frog needs like spots, so you could draw different size spots. I like to mix it up and draw little ones and bigger ones. And the spots are not on the belly of the frog. They're only on the sort of top half or back half in this picture. And then I'm going to draw another one of my favorite animals from the book, which is the giant bird, which is Rhea, was it Rhea or Rhea?
Really don't know how it's pronounced.
Yeah. So let's go with Rhea. Let's go with Rhea today. So I'm going to draw that giant. It looks a lot like an ostrich. I think a Rhea is a little bit smaller. So this Rhea is going to be, I'm going to start with the eyes as well. And I picture it sort of it either being like angry or just really confused all the time. So that right now it is sort of, it's kind of angry that this frog is in its personal space. So we're going to draw the feathers, nice shaggy body of feathers like an ostrich. The neck is kind of shaggy, a little bit shaggier than an ostrich's, I think. And then the legs. Let's see. It's got legs like an ostrich. And then the last thing I'm going to draw, some nice legs. All right. The last thing I'll draw will be a surprise guest, will be the Admiral's son giving us a nice wave. Or maybe he'll give us a thumbs up. Nice thumbs up. Like that. And a little bit of drop of spit coming off of that wet hand. All right. So that, my friends, is a quick rendering of a giant frog, a giant bird, and a normal-sized human inside of the frog. All right. So I hope we have some good questions ready from our friends who are watching. We can get our friend
here we
Paul.
go. Hello.
Yes.
That was incredible. I love watching a talented illustrator illustrate like that, because it's you
thanks.
do it with the casualness with which I would draw a stick person, you know, and it comes out just like it is in the book. Yeah, we do. We have time for a couple of quick questions. I do want to say that, like, I want to know if you guys are planning. You keep calling this a trilogy, but I want to know if you're planning another adventure, because I do feel like Paris comes up a lot there at the end.
It's really funny you mentioned that, because I do have a fourth story, and the idea always that I wanted to get them to Paris. You're the first person to ever ask that, I think. But these stories are weird. I mean, we're not hiding the fact that they're weird, and each one is weirder than the next. And the fourth one, if anybody ever lets us publish it, I can guarantee is even weirder than the first three. So really, it's just a challenge of finding somebody out there with the courage to let it happen. But I'm confident that it will eventually happen, because Matt and I have a way of getting things done. If you're just patient, persistent, and you just keep asking people over and over again until you wear them down.
We are working. We have another book we're going to do together, and it's not related to this trilogy, but another picture book that Phil is writing and I'll be illustrating. And then, because we're friends and we talk about fun stuff all the time, we are hoping to do other projects as well. I had done some drawings in my sketchbook, and I said, "Hey Phil, what do you?" It wasn't for a story. I sent it to him, and I was like, "Can you think of a story about these characters I drew?" And he's got some cool stuff cooking, so we're excited about that too.
It's very awesome. Yeah, I was interested in y'all's collaborative process, because you said 3 years you've been working on this book together, and it seems like y'all have a kind of a unique relationship for an author and an illustrator in the picture book world. Like, you guys are incredibly collaborative, I feel like.
Yeah, well, I think because I had only made books with Aaron, and we live together, we share a studio together, that's the only way I know how to make a book with another person. And so it really wasn't even an option to do it the sort of standard way of just sending off a text and into the void, and then maybe getting a book back 3 years later. The only way I can work, I think, is if I'm sort of working in collaboration. But that said, I don't really, I mean, maybe Matt has a different opinion, but like, I don't really tell Matt what to do. And I try not to give him any boundaries once I hand something over to him. It's when I give it to him, it belongs to him. And I think of these more as Matt Cordell books than books that belong to me, even, because they become so wildly different once Matt does his thing. So we do collaborate, but I feel like a major part of our collaboration is just me saying, yes, let's do that, when Matt comes up with an idea. So yeah, it is unique though.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And I think we'll do one more quick one. Donnie K, who you probably know, said she loves seeing all these different mediums that you use for each book, and that you don't use the same style for each book. Is there one that is your favorite, or is that like asking who your favorite child is?
That's probably for Phil, I'm guessing, because when you were talking about using different art supplies.
I think that's mostly for Phil. I will, yeah.
My favorite book there's different ways to answer the question. So there's the book that I had the most fun making. And the answer to that one is Jonathan and the Big Blue Boat. I just loved making a book like that. And when I made it, it was my second book I'd ever made. I thought that was going to be the style I worked in forever. But I learned very quickly that style just wasn't appropriate to other stories I might do. And so even, 10 years later, I've never gone back to that style. So that was the most fun. But then there are books that are really, really personal. I did a book called All the Animals Where I Live. That's really, at its core is just about how much I love my dog and how much I loved my grandma. And because it was such a personal book, in many ways, that's my favorite. But then, every book I do with other people becomes my favorite. So every book I've done with Matt and every book I've done with Aaron becomes my favorite, because I get to see other people. Like, it's not stressful for me. I write this text and then I give it to somebody else and they just solve all the problems. And I love that. It's so different from when I have to illustrate myself, and it's just every day is problems to solve. So it's just really cool. It's why I think Matt should start writing for other people.
I know. Sounds like a dream.
Awesome. Okay, and then I think that's all we have right now. I will say I have a question to hear at the very end. Do you guys collect anything? You mentioned this famous stamp, Matt. It looks like you collect some things. I just wanted to know, like, what are y'all's little things that you kind of end up piling up with? You maybe start collecting, you don't even know that you were collecting.
Yeah, I collect. I collect like behind me on my like cork board thing. I have a bunch of enamel pins, which are like things you can get it when you're on a vacation. It's like a little thing you can buy that's inexpensive, and it's a neat little souvenir and little nice memory of something that you did or place you went. But I also, like Phil mentioned, I love Star Wars. So I collect Star Wars toys from mostly, I guess, the newer things, because I don't want to drop a ton of money on it. But I just like, I don't know, it's just a fun thing for me, just to see what, with, different toys come out with every movie or TV show that comes out with Star Wars. So those are kind of my main things that I collect. How about you, Phil?
When I was a kid, I collected all kinds of things. I collected stamps, coins, baseball cards. Now, the only thing I really collect, other than children's books, which I have way too many of, are Petoskey stones, which down in Mississippi, you probably don't know what a Petoskey stone is, but it's the state stone of Michigan. It's actually a fossil. So the entire state of Michigan used to be underwater thousands and thousands of years ago, and was covered from end to end in coral. And now, if you're practiced at looking for them, all over the state, you can find little tiny pieces of fossilized coral. And they're really, really hard to see unless they're wet. But I just have this really peculiar knack for just finding them all the time. People sometimes go their whole lives and never find one. And I just seem to just find them all the time. They're mostly, unless they're really, really big, they don't really have much value. But every time you find one, you feel like you just found like a little piece of gold. And I love that sort of deep history that you feel whenever you find one, because you know that it's a million years old. You're holding something that's been waiting for you to find it for a million years.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you guys. I think that's all the time we have today. I just wanted to thank you guys for being here. If you guys enjoy what you saw, please go check out Follow That Frog. We have signed copies available at Square Books. There's a link in the chat where you can buy it from our website. We're open right now for browsing 9 to 6 Monday through Saturday, so you can come in and check it out, as well as many of Matthew and Phil's other books. We definitely have those available for you as well. So come by and see when you can. Thank you guys so much. Any parting words for everyone?
Just follow that frog if you see it.
But not too closely.
Keep your distance.
That's fair. Yeah, we don't need 2 arms sticking out of the frog. Yes.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you guys so much.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Kate.